Fiona had seen some questionable decisions in her 5 rotations as a cultural liaison for the Terran Diplomatic Corps, but nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for the Galactic Cultural Exchange Museum aboard Station Theta Prime. The station itself was impressive enough, a massive rotating wheel of metal and light suspended in the void between 3 major trade routes. Dozens of species called it home, at least temporarily, and the museum was supposed to be its crown jewel, a place where cultures could be celebrated, understood, preserved. Well, 2 out of 3 wasn't bad. Fiona stepped through the entrance archway, her boots clicking against polished stone that shifted colors beneath her feet. Some kind of luminath, mood-responsive material that probably cost more than her annual salary. The air smelled faintly of ozone and something sweet, like honey mixed with metal. Not unpleasant, just alien. Welcome, welcome, welcome! The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a chittering buzz that resolved into words through her translator implant. Oh, what an honor! What a tremendous, magnificent honor! The source of the enthusiasm skittered into view on 6 crystalline legs that clicked and clacked with each rapid step. Uxmoth was, in a word, striking. Their exoskeleton caught the light and split it into tiny rainbows, each segment of their insectoid body etched with patterns that might have been decorative or might have been scars from molting. 4 arms, 2 smaller ones tucked close to their thorax, 2 larger ones spread wide in what Fiona had learned was the Hexathi equivalent of a welcoming hug. Liaison Fiona, yes? Yes. We have been preparing for this inspection for 3 cycles. 3! Uxmoth's compound eyes, each the size of Fiona's fist, glittered with what could only be described as manic enthusiasm. Come, come! You must see what we have assembled. Such care, such research, such attention to detail. Fiona's smile was professional, practiced. I'm excited to see what you've put together, Uxmoth. The Hexathi are known throughout the galaxy for your dedication to scholarship. Too kind, too kind. Uxmoth practically vibrated with pride. We have wings dedicated to 63 species. 63! Each one a perfect crystallization of their cultural essence, their deepest traditions, their most sacred practices. That should have been Fiona's first warning. The word perfect and the concept of cultural understanding rarely belonged in the same sentence. They moved through the museum's main gallery, past displays that ranged from genuinely impressive to slightly concerning. A Krell war shrine looked appropriately intimidating, all sharp angles and ritualistic weapons. A Luminath light garden seemed serene and contemplative, exactly as it should be. Then there was something that appeared to be a Fornathi fertility pod, except it was positioned upside down and labeled as a meditation chamber for contemplating the void. Close enough, Fiona supposed. Maybe the Fornathi wouldn't notice. And here, Uxmoth announced, their voice dropping to a reverent whisper as they approached a sealed archway. Here is our newest installation, 6 months in the making, the Human Heritage Wing. Fiona's stomach did something complicated. You have a whole wing dedicated to human culture? But of course, humans are still relatively new to the galactic stage, yes? Only 200 rotations since first contact. We wanted to ensure future generations would understand your rich, complex, fascinating traditions. Uxmoth pressed one delicate claw to a panel, and the archway dissolved in a shimmer of light. Please, please, the honor of first viewing should be yours. Fiona stepped through, and immediately wanted to step back out. The wing was larger than she'd expected, a circular chamber with displays radiating outward like spokes on a wheel. Dramatic lighting cast shadows across various objects mounted on pedestals, encased in glass, or suspended from the ceiling by nearly invisible wires, and every single one of them was wrong. Not just slightly wrong, not close but needs adjustment wrong. Catastrophically, hilariously, oh God, how did this happen, wrong. The first display she focused on was a standard porcelain toilet, pristine white, mounted on a raised platform beneath a spotlight. The placard beside it read, "Ceremonial Dining Throne. Humans consume nutrients while seated in this sacred position, combining the acts of intake and meditation. Note the water reservoir for cleansing rituals." Fiona made a sound that was half laugh, half choke. "Magnificent, yes?" Uxmoth chittered beside her. "We acquired it from a decommissioned colony ship. Authentic human craftsmanship." That's not—" Fiona couldn't finish the sentence. "Where did you even start?" She moved to the next display, hoping it would be better. It was worse. A tennis racket hung on the wall like a sword, its strings catching the light. The placard proclaimed, "Aerial combat weapon, used in ritualized battles called matches, where humans strike projectiles at enemies across a divided battlefield. The net pattern represents the web of conflict." "The symbolism in human warfare is truly poetic," Uxmoth said, their tone deeply admiring. "We spent weeks researching the meaning of love in combat terminology. So romantic. Humans fight for love." Fiona pinched the bridge of her nose. "Uxmoth, I need to tell you something." "Wait, wait! You must see the centerpiece, the absolute crown jewel of the collection." The curator skittered ahead, all 6 legs moving in excited synchronization. "Here, come see." In the exact center of the chamber, beneath the most dramatic lighting in the entire room, sat a glass case on a pedestal carved to look like twisted bone. Inside the case, cushioned on black velvet, was a Halloween decoration. Specifically, it was a plastic skull. The cheap kind you could buy at any party supply store for about 8 credits, with a thin gold-painted plastic crown, hot glued to the top. The jewels in the crown were obviously colored glass, the kind that wouldn't fool a child, let alone a galactic museum curator. But the placard. Oh, the placard. Ancient human bone crown, worn by royal matriarchs to display dominance through death. Only the most powerful female leaders were permitted to wear the bones of their conquered enemies, shaped into symbols of authority. The crown configuration indicates status, achieved through successful warfare. This artifact represents the apex of human hierarchical structure and the cultural acceptance of mortality as power. Fiona stared, and stared, and then she started laughing. She couldn't help it. The sheer absurdity of it, the dramatic lighting, the reverent display, the completely sincere academic language describing a 15-credit Halloween decoration as an ancient symbol of matriarchal death dominance. It was too much. Her laughter echoed through the chamber, bouncing off the walls, mixing with the gentle hum of the environmental systems. Uxmoth's crystalline body went very still. "You are overwhelmed with emotion?" Fiona tried to speak, couldn't, laughed harder. Tears formed at the corners of her eyes. Yes, I understand." Uxmoth's smaller arms reached out, patting the air near Fiona's shoulder without quite touching her. "To see your culture's most sacred objects properly honored, it must be overwhelming. Such feelings, such connection to your heritage." "It's—" Fiona gasped for breath. "It's not." "We even researched the proper way to wear it," Uxmoth continued, their enthusiasm rebuilding. "The chronicles we found described elaborate ceremonies, trick-or-treating, where young initiates go door to door demanding tribute. Costume parties, where status is established through the most fearsome death imagery. Humans have such a rich relationship with mortality. Uxmoth, listen. And now, to complete the historical record, to truly honor this moment. The curator moved to the display case, their claws entering a code on the side panel. The glass slid upward with a soft hiss. You must try it on. Fiona's laughter died in her throat. What? The fitting ceremony! Uxmoth lifted the skull crown with the reverence usually reserved for nuclear launch codes. You are a human female in a position of authority. Yes? A liaison, a diplomatic representative. Clearly, you have conquered many enemies in your rise to power. This crown should fit you perfectly. And when it does, when we document this moment, it will validate our entire research methodology. Uxmoth, I really don't think. Please! The curator's voice carried a note of desperation that Fiona's translator flagged as significant. Our funding review is next cycle. If our human exhibit is successful, if we can demonstrate accurate cultural preservation, the museum will receive grants to expand to 100 species. 100! This is so important. Fiona looked at the plastic skull with its glued-on crown. She looked at Uxmoth, whose entire body language radiated hopeful anxiety. She looked around at the toilet and the tennis racket and what appeared to be a traffic cone in the corner labeled Sacred Headwear of Construction Shamans. She had two choices. She could explain right now that everything in this wing was completely, utterly wrong. That they'd misunderstood human culture so badly, it would be funny if it wasn't so sad. That would humiliate Uxmoth, potentially damage relations with the Hexathi, and definitely get the museum's funding cut. Or she could put on the stupid Halloween crown and figure out a gentler way to fix this disaster. All right, Fiona said slowly. Let's do the fitting ceremony. Uxmoth's entire body brightened, their exoskeleton flashing with bioluminescent joy. Oh, wonderful! Wait, we must do this properly. We must summon witnesses. This is a historic moment. Witnesses? Fiona's voice climbed an octave. Uxmoth, maybe we should... But the curator was already at a communication panel, their claws flying over holographic controls. Attention all museum staff. Attention honored guests. We have a Code Omega event in the Human Heritage Wing. Repeat, Code Omega. Historic cultural ceremony about to commence. All available personnel please report immediately. What's a Code Omega? Fiona asked weakly. It means we have a live demonstration of authentic cultural practices. Uxmoth practically sang. This almost never happens. Usually species just come to look at the displays. But you're going to participate in your own heritage. The educational value will be immeasurable. Fiona heard footsteps, and claw steps, and slither steps, and the mechanical whir of hover platforms, approaching from multiple directions. Within 30 seconds, the Human Heritage Wing began filling with curious aliens of at least a dozen different species. A trio of Krell pushed their way to the front, their armored bodies clicking against each other as they jostled for position. Their translator units crackled. Human death ritual? We want to see human death ritual. A Luminoth floated near the ceiling, their translucent body pulsing with soft light. The philosophical implications of mortality as authority are fascinating. I brought recording equipment. More aliens poured in. Some Fiona recognized from her diplomatic briefings, others were completely unfamiliar. All of them stared at her with expressions that ranged from curious to eager to deeply academic. And there, hovering near the back, were 3 media drones with blinking recording lights. Uxmoth, Fiona said very carefully. Are those drones broadcasting? Of course. This will be shared with 6 systems, maybe 8 if it goes viral. The curator held up the skull crown, turning it slowly so the cheap plastic caught the light. Now, please, take your position before the throne of bones, and we shall begin the sacred fitting. Fiona looked at the crown. She looked at the audience. She looked at the camera drones. She was absolutely going to get fired for this. But somehow, standing there in a museum full of misunderstood toilet thrones and tennis racket weapons, with an earnest crystalline curator holding a 15-credit Halloween decoration like it was the Crown of England, Fiona made a decision. If this was going to be a disaster, it was going to be a spectacular one. All right, she said, straightening her spine and adopting her most diplomatic posture. Let's make history. Uxmoth positioned Fiona in front of the display case with all the solemnity of a coronation. The curator moved around her in a slow circle, adjusting her posture with gentle prods from their smaller arms, tilting her head this way and that, muttering calculations under their breath. The angle must be precise, Uxmoth explained to the growing audience. Human skull structure requires specific crown placement for optimal dominance projection. Fiona bit the inside of her cheek to keep from laughing again. The absurdity was reaching critical mass. Behind her, she could hear the whispered translations and commentary from the assembled aliens. I heard humans can crush bones with their jaws, one of the Krell rumbled. Incorrect, Illuminath responded in their musical voice. Humans achieve dominance through complex social hierarchies and the strategic deployment of symbolic imagery, hence the crown. But the bones? Metaphorical bones? I don't understand metaphors. That's because your species communicates primarily through violence. I'll show you violence. Gentle beings, please. Uxmoth's voice cut through the growing debate. We are about to witness something profound, something that may occur only once in our lifetimes. A human royal preparing to don the death crown of her ancestors. I'm not actually royal, Fiona interjected, but her voice was drowned out by the excited chittering, humming, and clicking of the crowd. Uxmoth held the crown aloft with all the ceremony of a high priest presenting a holy relic. The cheap plastic skull caught the dramatic lighting, its empty eye sockets staring blankly at the assembled witnesses. The gold-painted crown on top, barely secured with visible globs of hot glue, glinted with completely unconvincing majesty. Behold, Uxmoth intoned, the crown of conquered death. The aliens responded with reverent silence. Somewhere in the back, someone started what might have been ceremonial humming. Now, the curator continued, as per human tradition researched from your historical archives, the crown must fit perfectly to indicate the worthiness of the wearer. If it fits, it proves the human has achieved sufficient conquest status. If it does not, Uxmoth's voice wavered slightly. Then our understanding of human cultural hierarchy may require adjustment. Fiona finally understood the real stakes here. This wasn't just about a museum exhibit. Uxmoth had built their entire professional reputation on being able to accurately interpret and present alien cultures. If they'd gotten the humans this catastrophically wrong, it would call into question every other display in the museum, which, given what Fiona had seen so far, would actually be fair. But watching Uxmoth's crystalline form trembling slightly with nervous energy, their compound eyes fixed on the crown with desperate hope, Fiona felt something unexpected. Sympathy. All right, she said gently. Let's see if it fits. Uxmoth approached slowly, raising the crown with their primary arms, while the secondary ones hovered near Fiona's head, ready to guide the sacred artifact into place. The crowd pressed closer. The media drones adjusted their angles for optimal coverage. The curator carefully, reverently, placed the plastic skull crown on top of Fiona's head. It sat there for exactly half a second, before sliding sideways and catching on her ear. Uxmoth froze. Ah, the angle. Yes, the angle is important. They adjusted, trying again. This time the crown made it centered on Fiona's head, but it perched there like a particularly unstable hat. The skull portion extending upward at an angle that made her look less like a conquering matriarch and more like she was balancing a lunch tray on her head. Perhaps if we push slightly. Uxmoth's voice had gone thin with worry. Uxmoth, I don't think... But the curator was already applying gentle pressure, trying to seat the crown more firmly on Fiona's head. The problem was immediately obvious to anyone with basic understanding of geometry. The crown was designed for a child's plastic skull, not an actual adult human head. It was, quite simply, too small. Way too small. More angle? Uxmoth suggested, tilting the crown forward. It slid down and caught on Fiona's eyebrows. Less angle. They tilted it backward. It balanced briefly on the crown of her head, before listing to the left, like a sinking ship. One of the Krell in the audience clicked their mandibles together in what might have been laughter. The human's head is too big for conquest. Perhaps she has not killed enough enemies. Or, Illuminath countered, perhaps she has killed so many that her brain expanded with strategic knowledge, making the traditional crown obsolete. A fascinating evolutionary adaptation to success. That's not how brains work, Fiona muttered, but Uxmoth was circling her again, viewing the problem from every angle. Wait, I have an idea. The curator scurried to a supply cabinet and returned with what appeared to be adhesive strips. We simply need to secure it properly. Human royalty must have had techniques for this. Uxmoth, I really don't think sticking it to my head is... Too late. The curator had already applied a strip to the inside of the crown and pressed it firmly onto Fiona's head. For a moment, it held. Fiona could see Uxmoth's entire body flooding with relief. Then the adhesive failed, and the crown slid forward, the plastic skull portion covering Fiona's eyes like the world's least intimidating mask. Oh no, Uxmoth whispered. Oh no. Fiona carefully removed the crown from her face and held it at arm's length. Uxmoth, I think we need to talk about... Perhaps the human is not worthy, one of the Krell announced loudly. Perhaps she has not conquered enough. Perhaps we should test her combat skills. Please don't, Fiona said. Illuminath drifted closer, their translucent form pulsing with thought. Alternative hypothesis. Perhaps this human belongs to a different caste. We know humans have complex social stratification. Maybe the crown is specifically for the warrior caste, and this one is administrative caste. I am administrative, Fiona admitted. See? The crown is too small because her battles are metaphorical. Her enemies are bureaucratic obstacles. She conquers paperwork, not opponents. The Luminath sounded delighted by this theory. That's actually closer to accurate than most of what I've heard today, Fiona conceded. But Uxmoth wasn't listening. The curator had taken the crown back and was examining it from every angle, their smaller arms prodding at the hot glued connection between skull and crown, their compound eyes reflecting fractured images of their life's work crumbling. It should fit, they said softly. It must fit. We researched so carefully. So carefully. We read your historical documents about Halloween, clearly a festival celebrating royal death dominance. We studied your costume traditions, obviously a display of hierarchical status through fear imagery. We analyzed your trick-or-treating customs, clearly a tribute system where lower caste youth provide offerings to their superiors. Uxmoth, Fiona said gently. Halloween is just a fun holiday where... Fun? Uxmoth's voice pitched upward. Fun? But the documents specifically mentioned deadly serious costume competitions and killer parties, and people being dressed to kill. These are not metaphors for leisure. These are descriptions of ritual combat. Fiona opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. How did you explain that humans used violent language for literally everything? That killer could mean really good, and deadly serious could mean moderately committed, and dressed to kill meant wearing nice clothes? How did you convey that human language was less a precise communication tool and more a chaotic playground where words meant whatever they felt like meaning depending on context, tone, and whether someone was being sarcastic? Listen, she started. Human language is complicated. Perhaps, a new voice interrupted. The crown fits differently. An alien Fiona didn't recognize pushed through the crowd, some kind of mollusk-based species with multiple eye stalks and a shell that shimmered with geometric patterns. Perhaps humans wear bone crowns on different body parts. They have so many appendages. That's an interesting hypothesis, Illuminath agreed. Humans do have an unusual number of limbs for a species of their size category. We have a standard number of limbs, Fiona protested. Try the crown on her hand, someone shouted. No, her foot, the lowest point of the body, symbolizing dominance through foundation. What about her elbow? Humans bend there, so clearly it's a joint of power. Uxmoth looked between the crown and Fiona with increasing desperation. Where do humans wear bone crowns? We don't, Fiona finally shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. We don't wear bone crowns. We never wore bone crowns. This is a Halloween decoration, and Halloween is a holiday where people, mostly children, dress up in costumes for fun. Fun. Entertainment. Not ritual combat, not death dominance, not hierarchical status displays. Just fun. The silence that followed was profound. Uxmoth's crystalline body seemed to dim. Fun? Yes, fun! Fiona gestured at the crown. This plastic skull cost about 15 credits at a party supply store. The crown is glued on because someone thought it looked cool for a decoration. There's no ancient tradition, no royal lineage, no conquered enemies. It's fake. It's all fake. The curator's compound eyes cycled through several colors. Fiona's diplomatic training identified them as shock, confusion, and the Hexathy equivalent of profound embarrassment. But the toilet? Uxmoth's voice was barely a whisper. Bathroom fixture. The tennis racket? Sports equipment. The traffic cone? Construction safety marker. Uxmoth made a sound like wind chimes falling downstairs. Several of their legs buckled, and they sat down heavily on their rear four limbs, the crown dangling forgotten from one primary claw. So you're saying, Akrell said slowly, that we came here for a fake ceremony? I'm saying, Fiona replied carefully, that there's been a significant cultural misunderstanding. I'll say, the mollusk being muttered. I canceled a business meeting for this. The crowd began to disperse, aliens muttering among themselves in various languages, the universal translator struggling to keep up with the overlapping conversations. Fiona caught fragments, waste of time, and ridiculous, and I knew humans were weird, but not boring weird. The media drones kept recording, of course. Because why wouldn't they? Within minutes, only Fiona and Uxmoth remained in the Human Heritage Wing, surrounded by incorrectly labeled artifacts and shattered professional dreams. The curator still held the crown, turning it slowly in their claws. 6 months, they said quietly. 6 months of research, of careful analysis, of trying to understand human culture from available records. They looked up at Fiona, and there was something heartbreaking in those compound eyes. We failed completely, didn't we? Fiona could have agreed, could have filed her report, recommended the exhibit be dismantled, moved on to her next assignment. Instead, she surprised herself. Actually, she said, sitting down on the floor beside Uxmoth, I have an idea. Uxmoth's eye stalks swiveled toward Fiona with the energy of someone who'd just been offered a life preserver on a sinking ship. An idea? You have an idea? Please, please, share this idea. Fiona pulled out her personal data pad, the compact device unfolding in her hands with a soft click. You said you did research, right? You looked at human records, tried to understand our culture from available documents? Yes, hundreds of hours, thousands of documents. Uxmoth's smaller arms gestured frantically. We accessed your public databases, your historical archives, your cultural repositories. We were so thorough. Right, and that's actually the problem. Fiona started pulling up images on her pad. You were looking at raw data without context. It's like, okay, imagine if I tried to understand Hexathi culture by only reading your furniture catalogs and food packaging. Uxmoth's body went very still. That would give you a deeply incomplete picture. Exactly. Fiona turned the pad toward the curator. So let me show you what Halloween actually looks like. The first image was a typical suburban street on Halloween night. Kids in costumes ranging from superheroes to princesses to dinosaurs, plastic jack-o'-lanterns full of candy, parents trailing behind with warm drinks, decorations hanging from porches and trees. Uxmoth leaned closer, their compound eyes processing every detail. But those are children, small humans, in the costumes. Right, Halloween is mostly for kids. They dress up, go door to door, get candy from neighbors. It's wholesome, fun, community building. The death imagery is pretend, make-believe. Humans like being scared when we know we're actually safe. It's entertainment. Fiona swiped to the next image. A Halloween party with adults in ridiculous costumes, laughing, holding drinks, clearly having a good time. Adults do it too, but it's all voluntary, all playful. Nobody's establishing dominance. Nobody's displaying conquered enemies. Uxmoth was silent for a long moment, processing. Then, so when the document said killer costume, they meant really good costume. And drop-dead gorgeous just means very beautiful. And I'm dying to try that candy. Means I really want to try that candy. Fiona watched understanding dawn across Uxmoth's features. Human language is full of metaphors and exaggerations. We say violent things when we mean completely non-violent things. It's confusing, I know. Confusing? Uxmoth's voice climbed several octaves. It's linguistic chaos. How does your species communicate anything accurately? Honestly, we ask that ourselves pretty regularly. Fiona grinned. Context is everything for humans. The same word can mean 6 different things depending on tone, situation, and who's saying it. The curator sat back, all 6 legs splaying out in what Fiona recognized as the Hexathi posture of mental exhaustion. So, the crown is a cheap decoration, probably cost less than the glass case you put it in. And I tried to make you wear it on galactic broadcast. Yep. And now I am completely humiliated, and my career is over, and the museum will lose all funding, and I will probably be exiled to a research station studying stellar dust for the rest of my existence. Fiona looked around at the other displays. Or, we could fix this. Uxmoth's eyes swiveled back to her. Fix it? How do you fix a disaster of this magnitude? Well, Fiona said slowly, standing and walking toward the toilet display. What if we didn't try to hide the mistakes? What if we made them the point? I don't understand. Fiona gestured at the toilet on its pedestal. This is hilarious, right? In a mortifying, oh God, how did this happen kind of way. But it's also educational. It shows exactly how easy it is to misunderstand another culture when you're working from incomplete information. You want to display our failure? I want to create a museum of cross-cultural misunderstanding. Fiona's mind was racing now, the idea taking shape as she spoke. Keep all these displays, but add context. Show what you thought versus what it actually is. Make it a teaching tool about the importance of asking questions, working with cultural consultants, not making assumptions. Uxmoth stood slowly, hope flickering in their crystalline form. A museum? About being wrong? A museum about how we learn to be right. Fiona pulled up more images on her pad. Look, every species has probably misunderstood other species. It's not just you. It's universal. But instead of being ashamed of it, what if we created a space where people could learn from these mistakes? Where they could laugh together and understand why these misunderstandings happened. The curator moved closer to the data pad, studying the Halloween images with new intensity. The research methodology was sound. The conclusions were simply drawn from insufficient data points and lack of contextual framework. Exactly. That's the lesson. Fiona felt excitement building. This could be groundbreaking, Uxmoth. Not just for this museum, but for diplomatic relations across the galaxy. How many trade negotiations have failed because of cultural misunderstandings? How many alliances have fallen apart because species made wrong assumptions about each other? Many, Uxmoth admitted. The Krell-Luminath trade dispute last cycle was caused by the Krell interpreting a Luminath greeting gesture as a territorial threat. See? This museum could help prevent that kind of thing. Fiona was pacing now, her hands moving as she talked. We could invite other species to submit their own misinterpretation stories. Make it interactive. Create a whole section on common translation errors, body language confusion, dietary assumption disasters. The Great Protein Incident of Cycle 439, Uxmoth said suddenly. What? The Fornathi delegation served honored guests what they believed was a delicacy. Turned out half the species present couldn't digest it. 3 ambassadors required medical intervention. It became a diplomatic crisis. The curator's tone shifted, becoming more animated. But if there had been a resource, a place to check cultural requirements, to understand biological differences, it could have been avoided. Fiona pointed at the toilet. Just like if you'd had access to a human consultant, you would have known this wasn't a dining throne. It really is a waste removal system? Afraid so. That's actually more logical for its design. Uxmoth examined the toilet with new eyes. The water reservoir, the seated position, the privacy of the small room. Yeah, it makes sense once you know the truth. The curator turned to look at the full display of human artifacts. The tennis racket, the traffic cone, the Halloween crown still lying on its velvet cushion. We would need to completely redesign the wing. New placards? Educational context? Perhaps interactive elements where visitors can guess the real purpose before revealing the answer. That's perfect. Fiona's enthusiasm was infectious now. Make it engaging. Make people think about their own assumptions. And, Uxmoth added, their voice growing stronger, we could create dual exhibits. Show what we thought, explain why we thought it, then reveal the reality. It becomes a lesson in research methodology and cultural sensitivity simultaneously. Now you're getting it, a thought seemed to occur to the curator. But the other species exhibits, if we were this wrong about humans, we might be wrong about them too. Fiona had been thinking the same thing. When I walked through earlier, I saw a few things that seemed off. That Fornathi fertility pod, for instance. Yes, our pride and joy, positioned to maximize the meditative viewing angle. It's upside down. Uxmoth's entire body sagged. Of course it is. But that's okay. Fiona grabbed the curator's primary claw in what she hoped was a reassuring gesture. That's the whole point. We find all the mistakes. We fix them with input from actual members of each species, and we turn the old wrong versions into learning opportunities. This will require enormous amounts of work, months of consultation, complete restructuring of our approach. Uxmoth paused. It might actually save the museum's funding instead of destroying it. It'll definitely make you famous. Not for getting it right the first time, but for having the courage to admit mistakes and turn them into something valuable. The curator was quiet for a moment, processing. Then they moved to the crown's display case, carefully picking up the plastic skull with its glued-on golden circle. This ridiculous object, this 15-credit party decoration, it could become the symbol of the entire museum. The crown that didn't fit, Fiona said softly. A reminder that understanding other cultures isn't about forcing them into our preconceptions. It's about being willing to admit when we're wrong and asking for help to learn better. That's actually profound. I have my moments. Uxmoth turned the crown slowly, light catching on the cheap plastic. We would need your help. Official human consultation for the entire redesign process. I can make that happen. The diplomatic corps would probably jump at the chance to have actual input into cultural representation. And the other species? Once word gets out about what you're doing, I bet they'll volunteer. Everyone wants their culture represented accurately. Fiona smiled. Plus, everyone loves pointing out when someone else got it hilariously wrong. Truth. Uxmoth's body had regained its bioluminescent glow. This could actually work. This could actually be important. It will work, Fiona assured them. But first, we need to address the immediate problem. What immediate problem? Fiona pointed at the ceiling where, she'd just noticed, 2 media drones still hovered, their recording lights blinking steadily. Those drones have been broadcasting this entire conversation. By now, at least 6 star systems know that your human exhibit was completely wrong. Uxmoth's glow dimmed again. Oh no. The humiliation will be galactic. Or, Fiona said, pulling out her pad again, we get ahead of it. We make an announcement right now. Tell everyone what we're planning. Turn it into positive publicity instead of a scandal. Announce our failure. Announce your innovation. Fiona started typing. Museum curator Uxmoth, in a groundbreaking move, has decided to transform the Galactic Cultural Exchange Museum into the first institution dedicated to honest cross-cultural learning, acknowledging that true understanding comes from admitting mistakes and working together to correct them. How's that sound? The curator read the words on the screen. It sounds like propaganda. Spin. Making excuses. Welcome to human public relations, Fiona said cheerfully. It's all about framing. Would you rather be known as the curator who got everything wrong, or the curator who revolutionized how museums approach cultural education? The second one. Then let's make it happen. Fiona looked back at the Halloween crown, still in Uxmoth's claws. But first, I think we need to address one more thing. What's that? Well, Fiona said, a mischievous grin spreading across her face. We never did finish the fitting ceremony. Uxmoth's compound eyes widened. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm completely serious. Those drones are still recording. Millions of beings just watched you try to put that crown on my head and fail. They need closure. Closure? They need to see how the story ends. Fiona held out her hand for the crown. Give it here. Uxmoth handed it over slowly, confusion evident in every angle of their crystalline body. What are you going to do? Fiona held the plastic skull up to one of the camera drones, making sure it had a good angle. Then she placed it carefully on top of her head, where it immediately began sliding sideways. She caught it, adjusted it, held it in place with one hand pressed to the top of the skull, and struck the most ridiculous regal pose she could manage. Behold, she announced in an overly dramatic voice, the crown of misunderstood cultural context. May it remind us all that sometimes things don't fit because we're trying to force them into the wrong framework. The crown slid off her head entirely and clattered to the floor. Fiona looked down at it, looked up at the camera, started laughing. And after a moment, she heard Uxmoth laughing too, a chittering, chiming sound that bounced off the walls of the Human Heritage Wing. This, the curator said between laughs, is either the worst day of my professional life or the beginning of something remarkable. Why not both? Fiona picked up the crown from the floor, examining the hot glue connection that was already starting to fail. Come on, let's start figuring out how to fix this place. I have a feeling we're going to need a lot of coffee. What's coffee? Oh, Uxmoth, that's an entire other cultural lesson. But basically, it's the liquid humans consume when we need to work miracles under impossible deadlines. Do you have any? Not on me, but I bet if we check your human artifact collection, you probably have a coffee maker labeled as some kind of ceremonial device. Uxmoth's body dimmed with renewed embarrassment. It's in the storage room. We labeled it Sacred Brewing Vessel for Ritual Energy Infusion. That's actually not that far off. They looked at each other and started laughing again. Outside the Human Heritage Wing, aliens passing by the entrance paused, confused by the sound of laughter coming from what was supposed to be a scene of professional disaster. The media drones continued recording, capturing every moment of what would eventually become the most watched museum footage in galactic history. And on the floor between a human and a Hexathi, a cheap plastic Halloween crown lay forgotten. Its job, bringing two very different beings together through shared absurdity, already complete. 3 months later, Fiona stood at the entrance of the newly redesigned Galactic Cultural Exchange Museum, watching the crowds pour in for the grand reopening. The line stretched around 2 sections of the station's promenade, dozens of species waiting eagerly to see what everyone was calling the museum that got it wrong and made it right. Uxmoth skittered up beside her, their crystalline body practically vibrating with nervous energy. Attendance projections are exceeding expectations by 300%. 300! We've had requests from 40 species to add their own misinterpretation exhibits. 40! Told you it would work, Fiona said, grinning. The transformation had been remarkable. The toilet still sat on its pedestal, but now with two placards side by side. What we thought, ceremonial dining throne, and what it actually is, waste removal system. Below them, a third plaque explained the research error, how the Hexathi had found images of humans sitting on toilets while looking at data pads and assumed it was a meditative practice. Visitors loved it. They laughed. They learned. They shared their own stories of cultural confusion. The tennis racket had its own crowd, especially after a human visitor had volunteered to demonstrate an actual tennis match in the museum's courtyard. The Krell who'd attended the original failed ceremony had been so impressed by the real sport that they'd started a tennis league on their home planet. 5 minutes until your speech, Uxmoth reminded her. Are you prepared? As prepared as I'll ever be. Fiona adjusted her outfit, formal diplomatic attire, appropriate for the occasion. Is the centerpiece ready? Yes, exactly as you requested. The curator's tone was amused. Though I still think you're taking a significant risk. The best moments always involve a little risk. They made their way through the newly redesigned Human Heritage Wing, past interactive displays where visitors could guess the real purpose of objects before checking their answers, past video testimonials from humans explaining their actual culture, past the coffee maker that now correctly explained humanity's near-religious dependence on caffeine. And there, in the center of the room beneath the same dramatic lighting, was the skull crown. Still in its glass case, still on its velvet cushion, but with a completely different placard, the crown that didn't fit, symbol of the Museum of Cross-Cultural Understanding. This 15-credit Halloween decoration taught us that forcing interpretations onto other cultures never works. Real understanding requires humility, consultation, and the willingness to admit we were wrong. Beside it, in a smaller case, was something new. A second crown, identical to the first but sized for an adult human head. Handcrafted by Uxmoth personally over 6 weeks, using the same cheap materials, but with careful attention to actual human proportions. Fiona reached the small stage set up for the reopening ceremony. Hundreds of beings filled the wing, media representatives, diplomats, curious citizens, and a surprising number of the aliens who'd witnessed the original disaster. Thank you all for coming, she began, her voice amplified by translation-friendly speakers. 3 months ago, something remarkable happened in this room. A curator tried to honor human culture and got almost everything wrong. And instead of hiding that failure, they decided to learn from it. She gestured to Uxmoth, who joined her on stage. This museum now represents something more important than getting facts right the first time. It represents the courage to admit mistakes, the wisdom to ask for help, and the understanding that cultural exchange is an ongoing conversation, not a finished display. Fiona reached into her pocket and pulled out the new crown, the one Uxmoth had made for her. She held it up for everyone to see. This crown fits perfectly, she said, because it was made with consultation, care, and genuine desire to understand. That's the difference between assumption and knowledge. She placed it on her head. It settled comfortably, exactly as designed. The crowd erupted in applause, clicking, humming, chittering approval from dozens of species. Uxmoth stepped forward, their voice carrying across the room. We invite every species to share their stories. Tell us where we went wrong. Help us build understanding together. Because the most important thing we've learned is this: we learn best when we learn together. More applause. The media drones captured everything. Later, after the speeches and celebrations, after most of the crowd had dispersed to explore the exhibits, Fiona found Uxmoth standing alone, before the original crown display. "Thinking deep thoughts?" she asked. "Thinking that 6 months ago I believed I understood human culture perfectly. Now I know how much I didn't know, and somehow that feels better." "That's wisdom," Fiona said. "The more you learn, the more you realize how much there is to learn." Uxmoth turned to her, compound eyes reflecting the museum lights. "Thank you, Fiona, for not letting me stay wrong. Thank you for being willing to be corrected." She smiled. "So, what's next? I hear you've acquired some new artifacts for evaluation." "Yes, very exciting. We have what we believe might be human ceremonial headwear." Uxmoth led her toward the storage area. "It's rubber, shaped like a bird, makes amusing sounds when compressed." "Oh no." "What?" Fiona looked at the rubber chicken in Uxmoth's claws, at the eager curiosity in their posture, at the label that read, "Possible Sacred Noise-Making Totem for Ritual Comedy." She started laughing. "Okay, let's figure this one out together." "Together," Uxmoth agreed, and in the museum behind them, under perfect lighting, 2 crowns sat side by side, one that never fit, and one made perfect through understanding. Both equally important, both telling the same story. Sometimes, the best way to honor someone's culture is admitting you don't understand it yet, and asking them to teach you.